She frantically tried to open the door to grab her phone to call 911, but before she could open it, she heard it, the deep rhythmic thump of rotor blades cutting through morning air. She looked up and her breath stopped. Two military helicopters coming in low and fast from the east, Black Hawk and an Apache, unmarked but unmistakably military. And on the street below, three more vehicles screeched to a stop, two black Suburbans and a tactical van, doors flying open. Men in body armor pouring out, some with FBI across their vests, some in military fatigues, moving with coordinated precision from hiding spots. Before we dive into how this all started, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Now relax, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. Keisha handed the wrapped breakfast sandwich to James Sullivan, the retired veteran who'd been sitting on this bench every morning for the past 7 months. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted it, and that's when she noticed them again. Three men in dark suits across the street, leaning against a black SUV, watching her with the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. They'd been there yesterday too, and the day before that. Sullivan followed her gaze, and something flickered across his weathered face. Fear maybe, or recognition. "Keisha," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse, "you should stop coming here." Before she could respond, one of the men pushed off from the SUV and started walking toward them. Keisha's heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed her bag and headed toward the diner, feeling eyes burning into her back with every step. She didn't know it yet, but she'd already crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and the breakfast sandwiches she'd been bringing for 7 months had set something in motion that would end with military helicopters circling her apartment building and federal agents storming through her life like a hurricane. 7 months earlier, Keisha's world had been small in the way exhaustion makes everything small. She worked double shifts at Mel's Diner, a 24-hour place on 7th Street that smelled perpetually of coffee and bacon grease, because one job wasn't enough, and because her online social work degree required tuition payments every semester that made her bank account weep. She was 29, black, tired in her bones, and running on 4 hours of sleep most days. The diner paid $2.13 an hour plus tips, and the tips were unpredictable. Good nights she'd clear $120. Bad nights she'd walk out with $40 and the knowledge that her rent was due in 3 days. She kept her receipts in a manila envelope, budgeting with the desperate precision of someone who knew exactly how many dollars separated her from eviction. The bench outside the Veterans Affairs office sat 2 blocks from the diner, visible through the front windows if she stood at the right angle near the coffee station. That's where she first noticed James Sullivan on a Tuesday morning in March, sitting with military posture despite the cardboard under him and the plastic grocery bag containing everything he owned. He was white, early 70s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors, and a neat gray beard he somehow kept trimmed even without a home. He wasn't begging, wasn't bothering anyone, just sitting there with his hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for orders that would never come. Keisha had walked past him for 2 weeks, telling herself she couldn't save everyone, that she barely had enough for herself, that getting involved would only complicate a life that was already complicated enough. Her apartment had exactly 6 things in the fridge: eggs, butter, bread, a jar of strawberry jam, leftover rice, and a gallon of milk 3 days from expiring. But one morning in late March, sticky and warm already at dawn, she'd packed extra breakfast because the diner had been slammed the night before and she'd been too busy to eat, nearly fainting during the breakfast rush. Better to have backup, she'd thought, wrapping 2 sandwiches in aluminum foil. Sullivan was awake when she approached, which startled her. His eyes were sharp, alert, scanning the street with the automatic wariness of someone trained to assess threats. He watched her carefully, like people either ignored him or told him to move along, and he'd learned to read intentions in the first 3 seconds. "Excuse me," Keisha said, holding out the wrapped sandwich. "I made too much. You want this?" He stared at the foil, then at her face. For a long moment he didn't move, like accepting came with strings he'd already been tangled in before. "Please," Keisha added quietly, "no catch, just eat something." He took it with both hands, deliberate and careful, and gave a small nod that somehow felt more formal than a handshake. "Thank you, ma'am," he said in careful, measured words. "You're welcome." Keisha paused. "I'm Keisha." "James Sullivan," he said, meeting her eyes with the directness of someone who'd spent years giving reports to superior officers. She almost walked away then, almost went back to her routine of not seeing, not getting involved, not making her life more complicated than it already was. But something about the way he'd said thank you with dignity instead of desperation made her stop. "How do you take your coffee?" she asked. His eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised. "Black, 2 sugars." The next morning she brought coffee in a styrofoam cup and an apple. The morning after that, another sandwich and a banana. By the end of the first week, it had become routine muscle memory, something she did without thinking. 5:45 a.m. every single day before her shift started at 6. Sullivan was always there, always in the same spot, always waiting with that same careful stillness that made him nearly invisible to everyone rushing past. They'd talk for 5, maybe 10 minutes before she had to clock in. Not about anything heavy, just small things. She'd mention her classes, crisis intervention theory was kicking her ass, and social policy was somehow worse. He'd ask careful questions like he was genuinely interested in Maslow's hierarchy and trauma-informed care models. He never told her his story, no tragic monologue, no explanation of how he'd ended up on a bench outside the VA office with everything he owned in a grocery bag, just small facts that slipped out like coins from a torn pocket. He'd been in the army, 23 years, infantry and later logistics. He took his coffee with 2 sugars because that's how they made it in the mess halls overseas. He was allergic to shellfish, found that out the hard way in Korea. He had a daughter once, but when Keisha asked where she was now, Sullivan just looked past her toward the VA building and said, "Lost touch years ago." Keisha figured he was just private, maybe proud, maybe carrying shame he didn't want to unpack for a stranger with a breakfast sandwich. She didn't push. She'd learned in her social work courses that sometimes people needed consistency more than they needed conversation. Keisha kept the routine quiet. She didn't post about it, didn't tell coworkers for praise or validation, didn't film it for social media clout. She'd seen how easily good deeds got turned into performance art, into content that was more about the person giving than the person receiving. But she did notice things. The breakfast evolved as weeks passed. When sandwich bread got too expensive, she switched to bagels, cheaper by the bag at the grocery outlet. When bagels felt too heavy in the April heat, she brought oatmeal in a thermos, still warm from her hot plate. The coffee stayed constant, black, 2 sugars always. She learned small facts about Sullivan the way you learn patience, slowly through observation more than confession. He used to repair equipment. She'd caught him once examining a broken watch someone had left on the bench, his fingers moving with practiced precision despite the slight tremor. He'd served in Korea and later Iraq. She'd noticed the faded tattoo on his forearm, a unit insignia he never explained. He had a daughter. Once when Keisha mentioned her own niece in Atlanta, Sullivan's face had shifted, something between longing and grief, and he'd said simply, "I had a little girl, long time ago." By mid-May, the cracks in Keisha's own life were widening. Her rent had jumped to $950 when the building changed ownership, $150 more than she'd budgeted for. The new landlord didn't accept payment plans or excuses, just money orders by the 5th of each month or a notice taped to the door. She was taking 12 credit hours of coursework on top of 50-hour weeks at the diner, social work ethics, human behavior in the social environment, research methods that made her brain feel like it was folding in on itself by midnight. She'd picked up every extra shift they'd offer, weekend doubles. Holiday coverage, the overnight rotation nobody wanted because it paid an extra $1.50 per hour. The math was always the same, never quite enough. Her kitchen counter told the story: electric bill past due, student loan payment deferred again, phone bill 1 month from disconnection, and in the middle of all that paper, a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs. One night in late May, Keisha stood at her counter doing calculations in her head. She'd gotten paid that afternoon, $340 from the diner, another $95 from weekend shifts. Subtract rent, subtract bus fare for 2 weeks, subtract the minimum payment on her credit card so they wouldn't close it, $67 left for everything else. She opened her fridge, 4 eggs, half a gallon of milk that would expire tomorrow, wilted lettuce she should have thrown out last week. Her stomach had been empty since lunch, a granola bar she'd eaten standing up during her break, but she'd learned to ignore that hollow feeling. She'd eat tomorrow or the day after. What mattered was the bread and eggs, enough for another week of breakfast for Sullivan, maybe two if she stretched it. Keisha closed the fridge and pressed her forehead against the cold metal door. She could stop. She should stop, keep the food for herself, catch up on the electric bill before they shut it off, buy herself a proper meal for once. Sullivan would understand. He'd probably tell her to stop if he knew how tight things were, but the thought of walking past that bench, seeing him there, not stopping, she couldn't do it. The next morning Sullivan noticed. "You're losing weight," he said quietly, watching her face in the dim pre-dawn light. Keisha forced a smile. "Long shifts, I'm fine." Sullivan didn't smile back. His eyes, always sharp, always observing, held hers for a moment longer than usual. "You work too much, ma'am." "Bills don't pay themselves," Keisha said lightly, handing him the coffee. "And breakfast?" Sullivan gestured to the wrapped bagel. "This pays bills." Keisha's throat tightened. "It's not about bills." "Then what's it about?" She didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound patronizing or self-righteous, so she just shrugged. "It's about showing up." Sullivan accepted the food with both hands, as always, but this time he didn't eat right away. He just held it, looking at her with something between gratitude and concern. "You're a good person, Keisha," he said finally, "but good people gotta take care of themselves too." It was the following Wednesday when Keisha noticed the bruising. Sullivan was adjusting his sleeve when she arrived, pulling it down quickly like he'd been caught at something, but not quickly enough. Keisha's training kicked in before her politeness could stop her. "James, your wrist." "It's fine," he said too fast. But Keisha had already seen it, faint purple marks around his left wrist, the kind that came from pressure, from gripping, from someone's hand wrapped too tight days ago. Her pulse quickened. "How did that happen?" Sullivan's face closed off. "I'm clumsy, old man, I fell." It was a lie. Keisha had studied enough about elder abuse in her coursework to know the difference. Bruises from falls were scattered, chaotic. Bruises from restraint were specific, patterned, deliberate. She didn't accuse, she just watched him, her mind cataloging red flags she'd been trained to recognize: unexplained injuries, defensive responses, sudden withdrawal when questioned. "Okay," she said carefully, handing him his breakfast, "but if you ever need help." "I'm fine," Sullivan repeated, firmer this time. Keisha had to get to work. Her shift started in 8 minutes, but as she walked toward the diner, she kept looking back. Sullivan sat very still on his bench, hands folded carefully in his lap, and Keisha thought, bruises don't come from being careful, something was wrong. The cardboard was gone. Keisha stood outside the VA office Thursday morning, holding the wrapped bagel and thermos, scanning the empty bench like she'd somehow missed him. No Sullivan, no cardboard, no plastic bag of belongings. Even the faint, worn spot where he usually sat, smoothed by weeks of his weight, had been erased by overnight rain. She checked the corners of the building, looked down the block toward the closed pawn shop, nothing. The early bus pulled up, hydraulics hissing. Keisha didn't move. The driver waited, then pulled away. Her chest felt hollow. She told herself it meant nothing. People moved, shelters opened beds. Maybe someone had offered him a cooch. Maybe the police had cleared the block. They did that sometimes, pushed people along without solving anything. It didn't mean something bad had happened. But by the time she finally walked to the diner 15 minutes late, the hollow feeling had hardened into something sharper. At work, Keisha moved through her tasks on autopilot, refilling coffee, taking orders, clearing tables, serving breakfast to people who didn't look at her face. Her hands did the work. Her mind stayed at that empty bench, thinner, paler, bruised wrists. During her break, Keisha sat in the back office with her phone, staring at the screen. She could call the police, report a missing person, but Sullivan wasn't technically missing. He was homeless, and homeless people moved. They didn't file itineraries, and without proof of foul play, what could the police even do? She pulled up the Veterans Crisis Line instead. The intake worker answered on the second ring. "Veterans Crisis Line, this is Monica. How can I help you?" "Hi," Keisha steadied her voice. "I need to report concern for a veteran." "Go ahead." "There's an older man, early 70s, white, who's been staying outside the VA office on 7th Street. I've seen him there for months. He seemed stable, but recently I noticed bruising on his wrists, unexplained, and now he's completely gone. I'm worried something might have happened." The worker typed something. "Has he asked for help?" "No, but he seemed afraid when I asked about the bruising, and now all his things are gone, like someone cleared him out." "Do you know his name?" "James Sullivan. I don't know his service details." Maury typing. "I'll file the report. If he shows up again, encourage him to contact Veteran Services directly. We have resources for housing and safety. Thank you. Keisha hung up feeling both relief and futility. She'd done what she could, reported the risk, documented her concerns, but it still felt like not enough. Friday morning, empty. Saturday morning, empty. By Sunday, Keisha had started to accept that Sullivan was simply gone. People disappeared from the margins all the time. That was the brutal truth of it. But Monday morning, he was back. Keisha almost didn't recognize him at first. He sat in his usual spot, cardboard returned. But he looked like he'd aged years in less than a week, thinner, face drawn, eyes shadowed with exhaustion or fear, maybe both. James, Keisha's voice cracked with relief. He looked up slowly and something in his expression made her stop short, not relief, not happiness to see her weariness, defeat, something desperate. Keisha, he said quietly, you came. Of course I came. Where were you? Are you okay? Sullivan didn't answer. Instead, he reached inside his jacket slowly, carefully, and pulled out a small flash drive, black, unmarked, attached to a thin chain like dog tags. He held it out to her with both hands. Keisha, he said, voice low and urgent, if I disappear again, you give this to the VA legal office, not police, not news, VA legal. Keisha stared at the flash drive. What is it? Records. Sullivan's hands trembled slightly. Truth, but truth needs the right place. Her social work training flared into full alarm. James, are you in danger? He looked past her down the street, like he was checking for something. Someone, danger's already here, he said. Then he pressed the flash drive into her hands, his grip surprisingly strong, desperate even, before he released it and pulled back. Please, he whispered, you promise. Keisha's pulse hammered in her ears. She should refuse, should tell him to go to authorities himself, should not get involved in whatever this was. But she looked at his face, the exhaustion, the fear, the quiet dignity barely holding itself together, and heard herself say, I promise. Sullivan's shoulders sagged with relief. Keisha slipped the flash drive into her apron pocket and immediately felt its weight, not the physical weight, it was barely anything, but the responsibility of it. She had to get to work. She was already late. She handed Sullivan his breakfast, but neither of them spoke. The routine that had felt simple for months now felt impossibly complicated. As she walked toward the diner, she realized with cold certainty this was no longer about breakfast. This was about something she didn't understand yet, something dangerous enough that Sullivan would rather trust a stranger than the police. And she'd just agreed to carry it. Keisha stepped out of the diner Thursday evening after a double shift, her feet aching in her non-slip shoes, her apron stained with ketchup and coffee. The sun had set an hour ago, leaving only the harsh glow of street lights and the distant hum of traffic. She walked toward the bus stop 2 blocks away, exhaustion settling into her bones. Halfway down 7th Street, she heard footsteps behind her, not close, not running, just there, steady and deliberate. She glanced back, a figure in dark clothing, too far to make out features, walking in the same direction. Coincidence probably had to be. Keisha kept walking, but her pulse quickened. The footsteps continued, matching her pace exactly. At the corner, a black SUV sat idling, engine running, headlights off, windows tinted too dark to see inside. Keisha's breath caught. She turned toward the bus stop, forcing herself not to run, not to show fear. And when she glanced back again, the figure had stopped, just standing there under a street light, watching. The SUV's engine revved once, quiet, a reminder that it was there, then the footsteps resumed, fading in the opposite direction. Keisha reached the bus stop and sat on the bench, her hands shaking. Nothing had happened, no threats, no confrontation, no contact, but the message was clear as day. We know where you work, we know your route home, we are watching. The knocking came 3 days later at 5:12 a.m., not a polite tap, not a neighbor asking to borrow something, the kind of knocking that announced itself like a warrant before the door even opened. Keisha was in her kitchen, still in her waitress uniform from the overnight shift, holding a mug of instant coffee she hadn't tasted yet. Her body went rigid at the sound. Through the peephole she saw 3 men in dark suits standing in formation like they'd rehearsed it, the tall one in front, sharp-jawed and cold-eyed, 2 others flanking him, scanning the hallway with professional calm. Keisha's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't open the door. Can I help you? The tall man's voice came through smooth and measured. Keisha, we need to talk. I don't think we have anything to talk about. I think we do. A pause, calculated. It's about James Sullivan. May we come in? No. Silence, then his voice again, still polite, still patient. We can talk through the door if you prefer, but your neighbors might find it interesting. Keisha's mind raced. She lived in a building where walls were thin and people noticed things. He knew that he was giving her a choice that wasn't really a choice. She unlocked the deadbolt but kept the chain latched, opening the door just enough to see them clearly. The tall man's smile was thin and humorless. "Thank you, this won't take long. What do you want? You've been very involved in Sullivan's situation." He tilted his head slightly, studying her face. "We appreciate your concern, but he's receiving proper care now. There's no need for you to continue interfering." "I'm not interfering. He's a vulnerable veteran, and I reported concerns through appropriate channels. That's what I'm trained to do." The man's smile didn't waver. "Trained, yes. You're a waitress working toward your social work degree, correct?" The fact that he knew specifics about her life, her education, her schedule, sent ice through her veins. "I did my job," Keisha said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands wanted to shake. "Nothing more." "Your job," he repeated softly, "is to serve food at a diner, not to involve yourself in private matters that don't concern you." Behind him, one of the other men's gaze flicked down to Keisha's hands, then to the small kitchen table visible through the gap in the door. Scanning, searching for something, the flash drive. Keisha felt a flash of relief that she'd hidden it in her apartment, tucked inside a box of tampons under her bathroom sink where no one would think to look. "Sullivan asked me for help," Keisha said carefully. "I provided it, that's all." The tall man's expression hardened slightly, the politeness slipping just enough to show something colder underneath. Sometimes help creates more problems than it solves, for everyone involved. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality." He leaned closer to the gap in the door, his voice dropping. "You seem like a smart woman, Keisha. Smart women understand when to step back." "And if I don't?" His smile returned, colder now. "Everyone's afraid of something. Maybe it's losing a job, maybe it's safety, maybe it's something else. The point is fear is reasonable. It keeps people alive." Keisha's pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I've already reported everything I know to the proper authorities. I don't have anything you want, and I'm not going to stop advocating for someone who needs protection." For a moment no one spoke. The two other men shifted slightly, exchanging glances, silent communication passing between them. One man's hand moved to his pocket, not reaching for anything, just resting there, a reminder of possibilities. Then the tall man straightened, his expression smoothing back into false courtesy. "We'll leave you to your morning then, but I hope you'll think carefully about what I've said." He started to turn away, then paused. "Oh, and Keisha, be careful walking to work. Early mornings can be dangerous. You never know who you might run into." The words hung in the air like smoke. Then he stepped back, and the three men walked down the hallway in formation, unhurried, confident, like they'd accomplished exactly what they came to do. If you're enjoying this story, smash that subscribe button right now, and drop a comment below. What do you think Keisha should do next? Should she back down to stay safe, or keep pushing forward? Let me know your thoughts. Keisha watched through the peephole until they disappeared around the corner toward the stairs. Then she closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, her legs suddenly unsteady. Her hands were shaking now. The coffee mug trembled in her grip. She set it down on the counter and pulled out her phone. First, she texted her social work professor, Dr. Martinez, who'd given the class her personal number for emergencies. "3 men came to my apartment. Same ones following the veteran I reported. I'm okay, but documenting, need advice." Then she opened her notes app and typed everything while it was fresh: date, time, exact words, physical descriptions, the implied threats. "Everyone's afraid of something. Be careful walking to work." Not overt threats, nothing that would hold up in court on its own, but threats nonetheless, carefully worded, plausibly deniable intimidation. Her phone buzzed. "Dr. Martinez, call VA Legal Services immediately. Do not engage with these people again. Document everything. Are you safe right now?" Keisha stared at the message, then at her apartment door. The knocking had stopped. The men had left, but they hadn't left like they'd lost. They'd left like they were recalculating, like the conversation had been a test, and they'd gotten the information they needed. Keisha realized with cold certainty the next move wouldn't be a conversation. It would be something else entirely, and she had no idea how to prepare for it. The schedule change came 2 days after the knock. Keisha arrived for her Thursday shift and found her name moved to weekends only, a rotation she hadn't requested and couldn't afford. Weekend shifts paid the same, but killed her class schedule and any chance of picking up the weekday overtime that kept her rent current. She found her manager Carol in the back office. "Did you change my schedule?" Carol looked up. "Uncomfortable, corporate decision, workload balancing. I'm suddenly weekends only starting next week. I didn't request that." Carol's expression was carefully neutral. "I don't make these calls anymore. That comes from above. You can file a complaint with HR if you want." "Can they do that?" "You're not union and your contract allows schedule modifications with notice." Carol lowered her voice. "Look, Keisha, I don't know what's going on, but someone called corporate, made some kind of complaint, said you were harassing customers, getting too involved in people's personal business." Keisha's stomach dropped. "That's not true." "I know," Carol said quietly, "but it doesn't matter. The call came from someone with reach, someone corporate listened to. My advice is keep your head down and don't give them more reasons." By Friday, the rumors had started. Keisha overheard two servers in the break room. "I heard she's been stalking some guy's family, like following them around, causing problems." "Who?" "That new girl, Keisha. Management's watching her close." Keisha walked in, and both women went quiet, exchanging glances before leaving. The isolation was subtle but effective. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Coworkers who'd been friendly now kept interactions strictly professional. Even Ray the cook, who usually joked with her, seemed distant, distracted. Keisha told herself it didn't matter. She'd done the right thing. The system was working, slowly, imperfectly, but working, except Sullivan had disappeared again. When Keisha checked the bench Monday morning, his spot was empty. No cardboard, no belongings, no sign he'd ever been there. She stood at the VA office entrance Tuesday afternoon after her shift ended. The administrative assistant behind the plexiglass looked up with practiced bureaucratic patience. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about a veteran, James Sullivan, early 70s. He was staying outside this building. I'm concerned about his welfare." The assistant's expression didn't change. "Are you family?" "No, but I've been helping him, bringing him food. I reported concerns about his safety, and now he's missing. I can't discuss veteran information with non-family members, privacy regulations." "I'm not asking for his records," Keisha said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I just need to know if someone's helping him, if he's safe." The assistant softened slightly. "If you've filed reports with veteran services, they'll follow up within their protocols. That's all I can tell you. If you have new information about immediate danger, you can speak with a social worker, but they won't be able to share case details with you." Keisha left the building feeling both relieved and powerless. She'd done what she was supposed to do, built the paper trail, reported through proper channels, trusted the system, but it still felt like not enough. That night, Keisha couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in her mind. Sullivan taken somewhere against his will. Sullivan hiding from people who wanted the flash drive. Sullivan safe in veteran housing, and she was worrying over nothing. At 2:00 a.m. she got up and retrieved the flash drive from its hiding place. She held it in her palm, this tiny piece of plastic and metal that somehow held enough information to make men in suits come knocking at her door before dawn. She plugged it into her laptop. The drive was encrypted, password protected, a single folder labeled evidence. She tried a few obvious passwords, Sullivan's name, variations of military terms. Nothing worked. Keisha unplugged it and put it back in the tampon box. Whatever was on there, Sullivan had trusted her to get it to the right people, not to open it herself, not to become part of the story, just to deliver it. Wednesday morning, Keisha was walking to the bus stop when she saw them again. The same black SUV from before, parked across the street, engine running, two men inside, watching, not hiding, not pretending to be doing anything else, just watching her with the kind of open surveillance meant to intimidate. Keisha kept walking, her pulse hammering. She got on the bus and sat near the back. Through the window, she watched the SUV pull out and follow the bus for 3 blocks before turning off. They wanted her to know they were there, wanted her to feel the pressure, wanted her afraid enough to stop asking questions. It was working. At the diner, Keisha lasted 2 hours before Carol called her into the office. "I need you to go home." "What? Why?" Corporate called again. Carol wouldn't meet her eyes. "They're putting you on administrative leave pending investigation." "Investigation of what?" "The harassment complaints. I don't have details, but you're suspended with pay for 2 weeks while they review." Keisha felt the room tilt slightly. "Carol, this is retaliation. Someone's trying to shut me up because I reported elder abuse. I can't speak to that, Carol said quietly, but if that's true you should document it, file your own complaint, talk to a lawyer maybe. I'm sorry, Keisha, but my hands are tied. Keisha walked out of the diner at 10:00 a.m. on a Wednesday, suspended, watched, isolated, and completely out of options except one. She pulled out her phone and called the number on the card Dr. Martinez had given her, VA Legal Services. The attorney's name was Rebecca Chen, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of calm intensity that came from years of fighting bureaucracy and winning more often than not. She met Keisha at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the VA office, neutral ground, public enough to be safe. "Tell me everything," Rebecca said, pulling out a legal pad. "Start from the beginning." Keisha told her about the 7 months of breakfast, about Sullivan's bruises and disappearances, about the flash drive and the men at her door and the SUV following her and the suspension from work. She laid it all out in chronological order, facts and observations, the way she'd been trained to document in her social work classes. Rebecca took notes without interrupting. When Keisha finished, Rebecca sat back and studied her for a long moment. "Do you still have the flash drive?" "Yes." "Have you opened it?" "It's encrypted. I tried but couldn't get in." Rebecca nodded. "Good, don't try again. That's evidence and we need chain of custody clean. I'm going to need you to turn it over to me today. I'll get it to federal investigators who are already looking into this operation." Keisha's heart jumped, already looking into it. "James Sullivan isn't the first veteran caught in this network," Rebecca said carefully. "We've had reports for 8 months about a lone operation targeting homeless vets, predatory lending, identity theft, debt bondage. The man running it is named Park Min-yi, Korean organized crime. Very careful, very connected, very dangerous. The men who came to my apartment. Probably his enforcers." Rebecca leaned forward. "Here's what you need to understand, Keisha. You did exactly the right thing reporting through proper channels. Your documentation is going to be crucial for the federal case. But you're also now a witness in a criminal investigation, which means you need to be smart about your safety. They've already threatened me." "I know, and that's going to be part of the evidence too." Rebecca pulled out a business card. "This is the FBI agent handling the case. I'm going to call him today, get you on record, get you protection if needed. But in the meantime, you do not engage with these people. You don't go looking for Sullivan. You don't try to investigate on your own. You document and report and let professionals handle it. Understood?" Keisha nodded, throat tight. "Is Sullivan safe?" Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "I can't give you details about his case, but I can tell you he's cooperating with investigators and he's in protected placement. What you did, bringing him breakfast, noticing the signs, reporting consistently, you probably saved his life." 2 weeks later, Keisha stood in her apartment at 5:00 a.m. staring at the text message that had just come through from an unknown number. "Stay inside. Do not leave your building. Federal operation in progress. You are safe. This is Rebecca Chen." Her heart hammered as she moved to the window. 5 floors up, overlooking the street, dawn was just breaking, casting long shadows across empty sidewalks. Then she saw them, the black SUV pulling up in front of her building, the same one that had been following her, 3 men getting out, the tall one from before and his 2 enforcers moving toward her building entrance with purpose. Keisha's breath caught. They were coming for her, coming to silence her or take the flash drive or worse. She grabbed her phone to call 911, but before she could dial, she heard it, the deep rhythmic thump of rotor blades cutting through morning air. She looked up and her breath stopped. 2 military helicopters coming in low and fast from the east, Black Hawks, unmarked but unmistakably military, and on the street below 3 more vehicles screeched to a stop. 2 black Suburbans and a tactical van, doors flying open, men in body armor pouring out, some with FBI across their vests, some in military fatigues, moving with coordinated precision. The 3 men from the SUV froze. The tall one's hand moved toward his jacket, but he stopped when a voice boomed through a megaphone. "Federal agents, hands where we can see them, do not move." The helicopters hovered overhead, downdraft whipping trash and leaves into spirals, soldiers fast-roping down to the street, securing perimeters, blocking exits, the whole operation unfolding in less than 90 seconds like choreographed violence. Keisha watched from her window, hands pressed against the glass, barely breathing. The 3 men were on the ground now, Hands behind their heads, federal agents swarming, more vehicles arriving, the street transforming into a command center. Her phone rang. Rebecca Chen. Keisha, are you watching? What's happening? Federal raid. They've been planning it for weeks. Your documentation gave them probable cause for warrants. They're hitting 12 locations simultaneously. Park Min-yee's entire operation, loan offices, safe houses, everything. The helicopters. Sullivan's idea actually, Rebecca's voice carried something like admiration. Turns out he wasn't just a logistics officer, he was Army intelligence, retired but still connected. When he realized how big this operation was, he contacted his former unit, coordinated with FBI. They've been building this case for months, and he was gathering evidence the whole time. Keisha's legs felt weak. He was undercover. Not officially, but effectively, yes. He let himself be trapped in their system so he could document it from inside. The flash drive you protected. That's financial records, victim lists, communications, everything they need to dismantle the network, and you kept it safe when they were actively hunting for it. Keisha sank onto her couch, watching through the window as more agents secured the scene. Is he okay? He's here actually, Rebecca said. Coordinated the whole thing from the command center. He wants to talk to you, but it'll have to wait until after debriefing. In the meantime, stay inside. Agents will come up to take your statement in about an hour. You're safe now, Keisha. It's over. The phone went quiet. Keisha sat in her apartment as dawn light spread across the city, listening to the helicopters circling overhead, watching federal agents methodically process the scene below. She thought about 7 months of breakfast sandwiches, about how small acts of consistency had somehow intersected with something much larger, about how she'd thought she was helping a vulnerable veteran when really she'd been part of an intelligence operation she never knew existed. 3 hours later, Keisha sat across from FBI agent Martinez and Rebecca Chen in a temporary command center set up in her building's community room. She walked them through everything again, the timeline, the observations, the threats, the documentation, every detail recorded and catalogued. Your reports to Veteran Services triggered our investigation, Agent Martinez said. We'd been hearing rumors about this operation, but couldn't get inside. Sullivan volunteered to go undercover after his daughter was targeted by the same network 5 years ago. He's been living on that bench for 8 months, specifically to build evidence. And you showing up every morning with breakfast that gave him cover made him look like just another homeless vet with someone who cared. Not an intelligence asset building a case. I didn't know, Keisha said quietly. That was the point, Rebecca added. If you'd known, you might have acted differently. Your genuine concern made the whole thing believable. Agent Martinez leaned forward. The men who threatened you, they're in custody now, along with Park Min-yee and 17 others. We've frozen $4.3 million in assets, recovered documents on 89 victims, shut down 6 predatory loan operations. This is the biggest bust of its kind in this region in a decade, and it happened because you noticed bruises and kept showing up. The cost had been real. Keisha was still suspended from the diner, corporate investigation ongoing. Her schedule was still destroyed. Her rent was still 2 weeks overdue. The rumors at work had left a stain that wouldn't wash out easily. Some nights she still woke up at 3:00 a.m. replaying the knock at her door, the footsteps behind her, the SUV following the bus, wondering if she'd made everything worse by getting involved, wondering if silence would have been safer. But she'd also gained something. Understanding that advocacy wasn't about heroics or saving people. It was about seeing them, documenting what you saw, using systems designed, however imperfectly, to protect the vulnerable, trusting professionals to do their jobs, and refusing to look away even when looking cost you something. Dr. Martinez had written a letter to the diner's corporate office explaining Keisha's role in a federal investigation. Rebecca Chen had filed a formal complaint about the retaliation. Within a week, Keisha was reinstated with back pay and an apology. Within 2 weeks, her schedule was restored. The rumors didn't disappear, but they faded, replaced by cautious respect from coworkers who'd heard the real story. 4 weeks after the raid, Keisha met Sullivan at a cafe near the VA office. He looked different, clean-shaven, wearing civilian clothes that fit. The exhaustion gone from his eyes, replaced by something calmer, settled. I owe you an apology, he said before she could speak. I needed someone who'd notice, who'd report through proper channels, who'd be credible when the time came. I saw you watching me those first 2 weeks, and I knew you were the type who couldn't look away, so I let you help me. I encouraged it, manipulated the situation so you'd get invested. Keisha sat across from him processing this. You used me. Yes. To take down a trafficking network that was destroying veterans' lives. Yes. And you're apologizing because... Sullivan's expression cracked slightly, something like guilt breaking through, because you got threatened, you got suspended, you got followed and intimidated, and you didn't sign up for any of that. You just wanted to help someone, and I turned your kindness into a weapon. Keisha was quiet for a long moment, watching his face, seeing the weight he carried, the daughter he'd lost to this same network 5 years ago, the years he'd spent building a case to prevent it from happening to others, the calculated risk of letting a stranger get close enough to notice the things he needed noticed. I'd do it again, she said finally, knowing everything. I'd still bring you breakfast, I'd still report the bruises, I'd still protect that flash drive, because the alternative was walking past you every morning pretending I didn't see, and I can't live like that. Sullivan's eyes reddened slightly. You're a good person, Keisha. You're not so bad yourself for a manipulative intelligence officer. He laughed, rough and genuine. I really did appreciate the breakfast. The coffee was perfect, 2 sugars every time. They sat there for another hour, talking about what came next. Sullivan was testifying in federal court, entering witness protection afterward, starting over somewhere new with a new name and a chance to rebuild. Keisha was finishing her degree, 2 semesters left, and she'd been accepted into an internship with VA Social Services, working directly with homeless veterans, turning the last 7 months of experience into actual credentials. The system worked, Sullivan said as they stood to leave, slowly, imperfectly, but it worked because you fed it the right information at the right time. That's all any of us can do. See something, document it, report it, trust the process even when the process feels broken. 3 months after the raid, Keisha stood outside the VA office at 5:45 a.m. holding a thermos of coffee and a paper bag with breakfast sandwiches. The bench where Sullivan used to sit was empty. He was gone, relocated, protected, safe, but she came anyway because the routine wasn't just about him. It had never been just about him. A woman approached, older, weathered, pushing a shopping cart with everything she owned, moving slowly like every step cost her something. She had a faded Marines tattoo on her forearm and eyes that had seen too much. Keisha held out the bag. Excuse me, I made too much, you want this? The woman stopped, startled, her eyes sharp and wary, studying Keisha's face like she was used to tricks, used to people who wanted something in return. No catch, Keisha said quietly, just eat something. How do you take your coffee? The woman's expression shifted, something between suspicion and desperate hope. Black, no sugar. Keisha poured coffee into the extra cup she'd brought, handed it over with the bag. The woman took both with shaking hands, careful like they might disappear if she wasn't gentle enough. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome, Keisha paused. I'm Keisha. Linda, the woman said. Linda Morrison, Sergeant, retired. Nice to meet you, Linda. Keisha checked her watch. I've got to get to work, but I'm here every morning, same time, if you need anything. Linda nodded, not quite believing it yet but wanting to. Keisha walked toward the diner as the sun rose over the city, the weight of the last month settling into something like purpose. She'd learned that advocacy meant showing up, meant documenting patterns, not accusations, meant trusting imperfect systems while also holding them accountable, meant refusing to unsee people even when seeing them cost you sleep and safety and the comfortable fiction that someone else would handle it. The system was slow, bureaucratic, frustrating, maddeningly imperfect, but silence guaranteed nothing changed, and Keisha had learned she couldn't live with silence, not anymore, not when breakfast and coffee and basic human attention could be the difference between someone drowning and someone being seen long enough to be saved. She didn't know what Linda's story was, didn't know if there were bruises under those sleeves or if danger was following her the way it had followed Sullivan, but she'd show up tomorrow and the day after that. And if she noticed something wrong, she'd document it, report it, protect it, trust the system to move at its glacial pace towards something resembling justice. Because in a world full of people who walked past suffering with their eyes down, someone had to stop, Someone had to see, someone had to care enough to bring breakfast at 5:45 a.m. and ask the simple question that started everything. How do you take your coffee? That was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that kept the darkness from winning, the only thing that turned ordinary mornings into something that mattered. And Keisha, tired waitress and social work student who'd never wanted to be anyone's hero, had finally learned she didn't need to be. She just needed to show up, pay attention, and refuse to look away. The rest would follow slowly, imperfectly, but it would follow, and that was enough. So what did you learn from Keisha's story? Drop a comment below and tell me the biggest lesson you're taking away from this. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next